Chapter 21, Humans in Equestria. The Canterlot Gardens had no idea what was about to hit them. The air nearly crackled with magical potential in the bright afternoon sun as a circle of a dozen unicorns, horns glowing, surrounded a bare patch of grass. In the center of the circle stood Princess Luna, her horn glowing and wings half spread as she frowned in concentration. Twilight Sparkle, blinking furiously to keep the sweat out of her eyes, carefully matched her output to the other unicorns around her. On one side of the circle her friends waited eagerly. Erin was having a conversation with her human friend Maggie. Her Ponyville friends were looking on with expressions ranging from fear Fluttershy to apprehension Applejack and Rarity and excitement Pinkie Pie and Rainbow Dash. Increase power to 20 thorns and prepare to harmonize with Ponyville, Luna said, voice ringing out loud and clear. Twilight and the other unicorns raised their energy output to match Luna's command. Erin, ask your friend to send the signal that we are ready. Yes, Princess, Erin said. Twilight knew that one of the human-controlled probes was now bobbing up and down in the field just outside of Ponyville, where another group of unicorns, led by Celestia, were casting a similar spell. Twilight was excited, honored, and completely terrified to be a part of this event. If they were successful, then many historical firsts would be accomplished today. The first time the Veil had been directly influenced by a spell like this, the first time that a fissure was opened using both magic and technology, the first time that magic had been used to select the location of that fissure, and the first time that visitors from another world would then use that fissure to open diplomatic relations with Equestria. If this all turned out, every pony here would have the names in the history books for what they'd accomplished this day. She found herself eagerly wondering what the humans looked like. Erin had tried to describe them, but with no point of reference, Twilight was having a hard time imagining them. In her mind, she was picturing elongated monkeys of a sort, which seemed both disturbing and comical. Of course, once they were done, then she wouldn't have to wonder anymore. She would see them for herself. Focus, Twilight Sparkle, Luna commanded. Bring yourself back into sync. Yes, Princess, Twilight replied, inwardly cursing herself for her lack of concentration. This was no time to daydream. Every pony was counting on her to do her part. The air hummed oddly, setting her teeth on edge. She was amazed to discover that she could actually feel the veil shifting, though she wasn't sure exactly how she was feeling it. There was a sense of motion, and a rippling in the magical field. Princess Celestia had another dozen unicorns in Ponyville casting a very similar spell, and she could feel a hint of her teacher's familiar magic as the veil moved. Almost, Luna said, scowling with her own efforts in shaping the field. Increase output to 23 thorns, prepare for full synchronization. Twilight grunted with effort as she increased her output. Her horn now had an overglow, small sparks of raw magic popping off randomly. She hoped that she wasn't the only one here who was taxed by this amount of effort. Celestia had asked her, personally, to be on this team, expressing her confidence that Twilight would be able to keep pace with the older and much more experienced members of the Arcanum. Twilight couldn't handle the thought of letting the princess down. She focused her attention single-mindedly. If any pony was going to mess this spell up, it wasn't going to be her. Erin, alert your people that we are prepared, Luna said. Erin nodded and said something, presumably to Maggie, that Twilight couldn't overhear. A second tone clambered over the first, jarring and unsettling. The two different tones were out of harmony, almost at odds with one another. It was like chewing tin to Twilight, and she felt her skin crawling at the sensation. Desperately, she tried to block it out, refocusing on the spell, concentrating on keeping her stream of magic feeding steadily into the shared pool that Luna was shaping. The two tones gradually shifted, coming more and more into tune with one another. Finally, they harmonized completely, and a section of the air shimmered as if in a heat haze. The shimmering became more pronounced until, finally, a window resolved in the air, hanging perhaps 2 inches off of the ground. Halt, Luna commanded. The spell is complete. Groaning, Twilight released her magic. She was somewhat relieved to see that she wasn't the only one feeling run down by the intense spell casting session. Several others were collapsed on the ground in apparent exhaustion. Attendants brought around drinks of water and were assisting several worn-out unicorns back to their hooves. She waved away an attendant who was trying to give her water. Now wasn't the time to be refreshing herself. There was a window to another world hanging in the air in front of her. Twilight stared into the window with acute interest. She was looking into another world. Granted, what she saw wasn't all that impressive, but that was beside the point. Various gadgets lined the walls, which were apparently made out of concrete and metal. There were a group of figures standing before the window. She stared, thrilled and fascinated, at her first glimpse of actual humans. They didn't really fit her preconceptions. She was expecting bigger ears and lower brows, for some reason. Also, they were all wearing suits or skirts or various other articles of clothing, many with what seemed like an odd cut, at least to her eye. She'd spent enough time with Rarity to know that the fabrics looked very high quality, and the clothing, though somewhat odd-looking, was very well tailored. She was surprised by how well she could read their emotions, considering she'd never seen one of them before. For the most part, they seemed to be caught somewhere between fascination and fear. Their hair was mostly like Erin had said, sprouting out of the tops and sides of their heads in various styles and colors, though they seemed to be restricted to a range of blacks, browns and yellows. She wondered, idly, which ones were males and which were females. It seemed fairly safe to assume the ones with skirts were females, but she'd wait for confirmation before making any assumptions. Though, she did recall that ones with beards were going to be male. She made out a few of those standing in the crowd, and, judging by the general appearance, marked several of the non-bearded ones as likely males as well. One of the humans, this one with a shortly cropped grey mane and no facial hair, stepped forward boldly through the gateway. The other humans trailed after, somewhat nervously, as the first one bowed deeply at the waist to Luna and said in an oddly accented masculine voice, Princess Luna. It is my very great honor to meet you. I am Sir Arthur Douglas of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and a representative of the United Nations. On behalf of all nations on Earth, I extend to you our most sincere thanks for your welcome to your world, and for your invitation to speak with you on what is a matter of great urgency to us all. The other humans bowed as well, but none of the others introduced themselves. Twilight gathered that Arthur Douglas was the lead spokeshuman for the group. Luna smiled warmly, spreading her wings slightly as she stepped forward, her royal regalia glinting in the light. Welcome, humans, and Sir Arthur Douglas. Welcome to Equestria. On behalf of my sister, Princess Celestia, myself, and the government of Equestria, I extend to you the spirit of friendship and cooperation, and hope that we can negotiate well, to our mutual benefit. For now, however, I will turn you over to Chancellor Oates, who will see that you are settled comfortably. For the time being, I must consult with my sister. I hope you won't mind my absence. Fare you well. With that, Luna spread her wings and sprung into the air. The apparently awestruck humans watched her go, mouths gaping open, which is probably why they almost missed it when a rose-colored unicorn mare with a red mane and purple glasses stepped forward, bowing her head formally. Good afternoon. I am High Counselor Rosie Oates, head of the Royal Equestrian Ministry of Diplomatic Relations. I will gladly lead you to your rooms. Or, if you prefer, we could take a tour of the palace. Very quickly, it was agreed that several of the humans would take the tour, while the rest, possibly servants or aides, would move the baggage and equipment into their rooms. 8 of the humans walked off with Chancellor Oates, trailing a collection of ponies from both the guards and ambassadorial aid staff, while the remaining 7 remained behind, bringing bags and boxes and strange, wheeled suitcases across into Equestria. The Canterlot porters materialized out of whatever mysterious space they inhabited when their services weren't required in order to help with the carrying. Out of the corner of her eye, Twilight saw Erin bouncing excitedly on her hooves, apparently trying to catch the attention of one of the humans in the garden. She wandered closer, curious, and heard her friend stage whispering, "Maggie. Maggie, over here." The human, a female, turned at that. When she saw Erin, a huge grin broke out on her face, and she crowed, "Erin. Girl, it's good to see you." The plump human rushed over to the excited pony and gave her a quick hug around the neck. Twilight stared in surprise. This was Maggie. She didn't look anything like Twilight had expected. She had expected, well, a more commanding figure, like Princess Celestia. This human was a bit shorter and somewhat rounder than the others, with streaks of grey in her brownish mane. However, Twilight decided that she had a friendly and open smile. "Allow me to introduce my friends," Erin said. "I feel like I know them already," Maggie said with a broad smile. Rainbow Dash and Pinkie Pie looked openly curious, almost rudely so, while Applejack and Rarity seemed more reserved. Fluttershy, of course, was doing her best to be inconspicuous, hiding behind Applejack. Erin quickly introduced her pony friends one by one. When she got to Fluttershy, Twilight watched in amazement as the human kneeled onto the grass. Slowly, she held out one of her hands, palm up, smiling gently at the cowering Pegasus. "Hello, Fluttershy," Maggie said softly. "My name is Maggie. I know you get nervous around new people, but I just want to say that I would never hurt you, and I really hope that we can be friends." Fluttershy looked out from behind Applejack nervously, staring wide-eyed at the human. "Hello," she said, then, ducked back behind AJ. Maggie sighed. "Well, I guess that's as much as I could expect," she said, standing back up. "Actually, that's more than I got out of her when I first met her," Twilight said, smiling as she trotted up. It wasn't until she saw Spike that she opened up. "If you really want to talk to Fluttershy, get a cute animal and show it to her." "Ah." Twilight sparkled. "I'm very pleased to meet you," Maggie said, smiling and extending her hand. Twilight extended her hoof, and Maggie shook it gently. Her hands were warmer than she'd expected. "You're a mare after my own heart, a scientist and a scholar." "This feels so odd," Twilight said, chuckling nervously. "You know so much about us, but today's the first day we've even seen any humans." "Except Erin, of course," Maggie said with a wink. "She doesn't count." "Hey," said Erin, full of mock indignation. Maggie, as well as several of the ponies, laughed. "Well," said Maggie, "amongst a select few humans, you guys are pretty famous, after all." Behind Applejack, Fluttershy let out a quiet squeak of distress at the word, famous. "Really? Famous?" Rainbow Dash asked, perking up. "You don't say." Her eyes drifted over to the humans toiling by the gateway. "I think I'll just head over there and see if I can lend them a hoof." Twilight rolled her eyes as her Pegasus friend wandered oh so casually over to the working humans to ask if they needed any help. She turned back to Maggie with a smile. "Well, I'm looking forward to visiting your world. When can we stop over there?" "Well," Maggie said, looking uncertain. "At the moment, Equestria and Project Harmonix are still top secret from the general public. We didn't want to get folks' hopes up until we were certain that we could move here. There's going to be a general announcement soon, but I'm afraid just having ponies walking around on Earth would be a little bit of a giveaway. If you really wanted to, though, I could authorize you to walk around the Harmonix labs, at least the secure sections. Would you like that? That would be interesting. Erin, care to show me around?" "Sure, I think that would be kind of fun. Besides, I'd like to pick up some of my stuff from my old room, like my tablet. Any pony else want to come with us?" "I'll admit to being curious," Applejack said. "Thank you," Rarity said, "but I believe Fluttershy and I shall go and have some tea somewhere quiet instead." Rarity smiled warmly at the obviously much relieved Fluttershy, who quickly stopped hiding behind Applejack and instead started hiding behind the fashionista instead as they both walked off. Twilight was about to ask Pinkie what her thoughts were, but Hyperactive Pony was nowhere to be seen. Looking around, Twilight finally saw her passing out what looked like party invitations to the humans left behind at the gate. "Should we get going then?" she asked urgently, tingling with eagerness to explore as much of this new world as she'd be allowed to see. "Sure thing, Twilight," Maggie said. She stood up, groaning and complaining about her knees, and then motioned the others to join them. As they approached the gateway, Twilight heard Pinkie talking rapidly to the reluctant and baffled-looking humans. "I know there's an official reception tomorrow night, but that's going to be all official and boo-ring. Trust me, you guys are gonna want to come to my party, tonight. I'll have cake and cookies, and punch and party games, and I even drew up a new poster for a game of pin the tail on the human, but I forgot you guys don't have tails, but that's okay, because it's all just in good fun anyways, right? Trust me on this one, fellas," Erin said as they got closer, "you do not want to miss a Pinkie Pie party. I've never had more fun in my life than that." Pinkie beamed at the praise, and the humans at the gateway hesitantly took their invites from the hyperactive pony. "We're going to go visit Earth," Twilight said to Pinkie and the nearby Rainbow Dash, who looked frustrated for some reason. "Did you two want to come with us?" You bet, Pinky said, bouncing happily. I want to see an Earth pony. She stopped bouncing briefly, thinking over her last statement. I mean, not an Earth pony, but a pony from Earth. Well, we can probably show you some videos, Erin said, but I guess we're not going to be leaving the harmonics lab today. Or, Pinky said with a pout. Look, let's just get going, okay, Twilight said, her eagerness overwhelming her patience. She turned towards the gate, took a deep breath, and stepped quickly through before her nerves failed her. The sound of her hooves echoed oddly on the concrete floor as she stepped into the large area on the other side of the gateway. She exhaled her breath and looked around, mildly disappointed. She'd expected something more odd when she crossed over the barrier, some sensation that denoted that she'd stepped from one world into another. Instead, it was just like walking into a room from outside. Humans in long white coats scattered around the room straightened up, looking at her with some surprise. Most of them were sitting behind odd glowing rectangles on desks, others were carrying similar small rectangular devices around. All activity stopped, though, as they became aware of the ponies in the room. She heard them whispering to each other excitedly as she walked slowly into the room. She heard a clattering behind her and turned to see that Erin, along with Pinky and Maggie, had followed her into the room. Applejack and Rainbow Dash glanced at each other doubtfully for a moment before they stepped through at the same time. This is the first time most of them have seen a pony from your world in the flesh, Erin said, stepping up behind her. I hope you don't mind that they're staring a little. Doesn't bother me, Twilight said, forcing a smile. The truth was, it was a little unnerving to be on the receiving end of this much attention from aliens. She was suddenly very glad that Rarity had made excuses for Fluttershy. The timid Pegasus likely would have imploded with this many strange eyes on her. She glanced back at the others. Only Pinky seemed completely unfazed, rubbernecking with unabashed curiosity. Applejack and Rainbow huddled close together, both trying to look nonchalant, but failing miserably. Twilight heard a small commotion from the room, and turned back to see a small group of scientists, mostly male from what she could tell, approaching nervously. One of them was holding a thick piece of square paper in front of his chest. Egged on by his colleagues, he approached the ponies hesitantly, walking slowly towards Rainbow Dash, who eyed him with no small amount of her own apprehension. Excuse me, Miss Dash, but if it's not a problem. He held out the paper, and Twilight could see that it was a remarkably vivid photograph of her Pegasus friend, a fierce scowl on her face, standing on the back of a downed chimera in a field outside of Ponyville. I'm a big fan, the human said, also holding out a pen. Could I have an autograph? Rainbow looked shocked for a moment, and then a look of sheer joy suffused her features. Yeah. Her friend said. Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. Erin barely managed to stop herself from sighing with frustration as the ponies were suddenly swamped by admiring and curious scientists. Rainbow and Pinky were eating it up, but Applejack looked about ready to jump out of her skin, and Twilight seemed to be actively looking for places to hide. Several more scientists had prints of the ponies and were waving them at them, trying to get autographs. Others were trying to ask questions, which quickly got loud as they had to shout over the din of everyone else's questions. Okay, that's enough, she shouted over the noise, stomping a hoof. These ponies are visitors to our world, remember. Give them some room to breathe. There's all the time in the world to talk to them later, now that we can visit whenever we want to. Erin's right, Maggie said sternly, arms crossed. I want you all back to your stations and monitoring this gateway for any distortions or anomalies, got it? The ponies may be stabilizing it, but that doesn't mean we get to slack. Some of the scientists muttered in protest, but they all moved back to their stations, while Erin tapped her hoof in annoyance. Sorry about that, Maggie said. We all get to watch the footage of your adventures in Ponyville, and a small fandom has sprung up. It's okay, Twilight said, though she looked a little shell-shocked. I'd probably be the same way, if things were the other way around. The ponies settled down after a while, and Erin took on the role of tour guide, answering questions and pointing things out excitedly. It was more fun than she'd expected to have, showing her friends the aspects of Earth life that she considered routine and mundane, but that the ponies were fascinated by. Unfortunately, the areas that they were allowed to tour weren't all that large. She did bring them to her old obstacle course, though, explaining that this was where she'd learned to be a pony. Of course, after that, nothing would do except for Applejack and Rainbow Dash to race each other through the course. The rest of the group watched the two friends go through the obstacles. Erin was overcome with a sense of nostalgia as she turned to Maggie and said, I know you could turn me back to a human, but I'm really not in any hurry. I'd like to stay as a pony for a while until things get settled. That's good, Maggie said, watching the ponies run the race. Pinky had suddenly decided to run as well, catching up to the other two surprisingly quickly. The ascent labs are closed down right now, in any case. What do you mean? Erin asked, alarmed. Well, once you were ponified and shipped off, we really didn't need Herman and his crew here anymore, so we shipped them off to India to see if they could do anything to slow down the tide at all. They're the international experts on nanotech, after all. We could get them back, but it would probably take weeks before they could get out here. Oh. Erin felt a little bloom of worry over that, and Maggie must have picked up on it. I thought you were okay with staying a pony for a while, she asked. Well, yeah, I am. But there's a difference between being willing to stay like this and not having any choice in the matter. Oh. Yeah, I can see that. But don't worry, it shouldn't be any longer than a month or two before he can spare some time to come back. No rush, I guess, she said, dissatisfied. She glanced up and saw Twilight giving her a look of sympathy, and smiled awkwardly back. Are you going to be okay, Erin? She asked. Oh, yeah, sure. It's not like I mind being a pony, Erin said, honestly. And I was ready to stay this way for convenience sake anyways. I kind of worry that things might go wrong, is all. Twilight pressed her shoulder against her in the pony equivalent of a comforting hug, and Erin leaned back into it. Shortly after that, their friends finished running the course. Surprisingly, Pinky had finished well in the lead, and was bouncing excitedly on her hooves. Let's do that again, she said, grinning. Let's not, Applejack replied, obviously winded, as she trotted up. That took more out of me than I expected. You're just getting out of shape, AJ, Rainbow taunted, though she looked pretty tired herself. Erin looked at her friends, concerned. This obstacle course was more for developing basic pony skills, not for endurance. She knew from personal experience that the other two were more than athletic enough to breeze through this without breaking a sweat, and yet they were both sweating profusely. She wasn't the only one that was concerned. Twilight was regarding her friends with a small frown. Applejack, would you mind if I lifted you up, briefly, the unicorn asked. I just want to check something. Okay, I guess. Twilight's horn glowed, and the earth pony lifted a foot off the ground. Twilight then moved her friend a few feet to the side before putting her back down. Is everything okay, Twilight? Erin asked. Her unicorn friend was frowning and staring at the floor. Everything is okay, yes, but that wore me out more than it should have. It's very subtle, but I've been feeling something was off for the last few minutes. My guess is that the magical field of Equestria is radiating slightly into Earth from the open gateway, but the further we go from it, the less magic we have access to. Since Applejack and Rainbow Dash's magic is mostly physical, they notice the effects of it first. However, we should be careful not to go too far away from the gateway. I don't know what would happen. Erin noted that her friends looked a little sickly at the thought of not having any magic. She definitely sympathized. Having no magic would probably be like losing a limb, to them. Maybe we should go back, Maggie suggested. We've already seen most of the interesting things we can buy now. That's probably a good idea, Twilight said, smiling gratefully. Actually, Maggie, could you take them back without me? Erin asked. I want to get a few things from my room, and maybe see Dr. Edwards really quick. I have to thank him for his help. Erin also had a favor to ask him, but she felt stupid even thinking about it. She imagined that the irritable scientist would likely just bite her head off for daring to waste his precious time. They said the goodbyes, and Maggie led the ponies back to the gateway. Erin took a moment to orient herself and then trotted off to find the room she'd stayed in as a pony. It was only a short trot there, and she smiled broadly at the familiar faces of the scientists and technicians she ran into in the hallways, all of whom greeted her with surprise. Her room was as she remembered it. She went to her nightstand and was going to grab her tablet and the charger when she realized that she'd left her saddlebags back in Equestria. Sighing, she took her pillow out of the case and shoved the tablet in there. She also stuffed in a book she'd been reading, an old-fashioned paperback. It was a Discworld book, and one she'd read before, but she hadn't quite had the time to finish it before heading to Equestria. Granted, reading a paperback as a pony might present a challenge, but it was something she was interested in trying. Just for fun, she also grabbed some of her human clothing from the packed suitcase on the floor. Rarity might get a kick out of that. In addition, she grabbed some ribbons and hair clips she'd left behind, thinking it might be fun to fancy herself up a little, now that the humans had arrived. Then, with her laden pillowcase dangling from her mouth, she trotted off to find Dr. Edwards. The doctor in question was just where she expected to find him, immersed in the cybernetics lab. One of his aides showed her in and led her to his office, where the man himself was scowling down at some paperwork on his desk. Erin swallowed her nervousness and tapped lightly at the door. Dr. Edwards glanced up, the look of supreme irritation on his face vanishing into surprise as he saw who was knocking. He got up and walked around his desk, opening the glass door. Miss Olsen, he said, I'm surprised to see you here. What do you want? Well, first I wanted to thank you for uncovering what Belcheek was doing to me, and acting to stop it. I didn't do it for you, he said, frowning, I did it because he was misusing my work. Still, you're welcome. Erin smiled uncomfortably. Dr. Edwards was still being brusque, but he wasn't being as outright rude as she was expecting. Still, the favor she wanted to ask might set him off. I have a favor to ask, as well, she began, but the skinny scientist raised a hand to cut her off. Let me guess, he said. You want your implants deactivated, now that we have open communications with Equestria. Is that right? Well, yes, Erin said, surprised. That seems reasonable. Did you want all of them shut off, or just the recording device? Oh, I didn't know that would be an option. Of course it is. Each device is designed to work independently, in case one or more of them fails. Erin considered it briefly, and then decided that she'd just like to have them all shut down. She still had the occasional nightmare with Malachite in him, especially after Celestia had informed her that he'd escaped from his prison. She wasn't sure what kind of mischief he could get up to without the override, but she decided that it would be better not to find out. If you don't mind, could you shut them all down? She asked. Of course. Just to let you know, though, the sensory implants will have to maintain certain minimal functionality in order for you to continue using those sensors. But I'll shut down all monitoring, broadcasting and receiving implants, as well as the recorder function. Anything else? No, Erin said, honestly pleased that this conversation had gone so well. Thank you again, Dr. Edwards. My pleasure. I'll have someone on my staff send the shutdown signals right away. Dr. Edwards turned and walked back into his office, then hesitated. Turning back to her, he said, I know I've been somewhat insufferable this whole time. For that, I apologize. All of this, he said, gesturing at the lab around him, had been thrown together more or less at the last moment, and they expected me to work miracles, without giving me the time I needed for bare functionality. It made me a little stressed out. I understand, Erin said, surprised. And, apology accepted, if you accept mine for the tantrum I threw during your diagnostics test a while back. Agreed, he said, with the first smile Erin had ever seen on his face. Granted, it was a slight, anemic little thing, but it was still a smile. You have a good day, Miss Olsen. And congratulations on your successful mission. Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. With every step they took back through the odd hallways, Twilight felt a little of her magic returning. The draining of magic had been a gradual thing, and she'd been too distracted by all the strangeness around her to notice it at first. Now that she was looking for it, though, she could definitely tell the difference. She discovered that she could actually feel where the gateway was, both the direction and by the strength of the magical field coursing through it. It was almost like feeling the sun on her coat. Applejack, Pinky and Rainbow Dash were also perking up, recovering more strength as they got closer to the gateway. When they finally crossed back over into Equestria, Twilight breathed a sigh of relief, which was mirrored by Rainbow and AJ. Maggie, stating that she had lots of work to do, said her goodbyes and left, but only after Pinky had given her an invitation to her welcome to Equestria party. Well, that was weird, Rainbow Dash said as Maggie left. Kind of like I was really tired for no good reason. Like I had the feather flu or something. I'd sure like to see what the Earth is like, but I don't reckon I'll be spending too much time there, what with no magic. I guess I never really thought much about how much I need magic to keep my strength up. I know what you mean, Twilight said, but something Erin told me about has gotten me thinking. Do you remember her talking about batteries? I have to wonder, maybe there's a way to store up a pool of magic in an inanimate object or something. That way we could wander around the Earth without getting all worn out. Yeah, well, you go work on that, Twilight. I'm going to stretch my wings a bit. See ya later. And with that, Rainbow Dash shot off into the air. Applejack pushed her hat back on her head, saying, well, I reckon, I'll go find Rarity and Fluttershy. You want to come with me? No, thank you. I wanted to talk to some of the unicorns from the Arcanum while I have a chance. Maybe they know of some way to store magical energy. Well, then, I guess it's just me and, hey, where's Pinkie Pie? I don't know, she was just here a second ago. They looked around, but there was no sign of the pink pony. Applejack sighed. For such a brightly colored pony, she sure can disappear when she wants to, she said. I'm sure she'll turn up soon enough, Twilight said. She's probably just getting things set up for her party. You're probably right. Well, I'll be off. See ya later, Twee. Twilight waved as Applejack wandered off, then looked around the grounds. Many of the Arcanum members who'd helped shift and stabilize the gateway were still around, talking amongst themselves and regarding their handiwork. Several younger and less experienced members of the Arcanum were also on hoof to maintain the spell that kept the gate stable. She glanced up as a quick motion caught her eye, smiling as she recognized the distant form of Princess Celestia returning to the castle. The princess landed on her private balcony and quickly made her way inside. She was sure the princesses were both busy, but maybe they could spare some time later on to talk about her idea for a portable magical reserve of some sort. But first she had to talk to some of the more experienced unicorns. If she was going to make a proposal to Celestia, she wanted to make certain that she already had as many details as possible already worked out. She was still talking to an elderly unicorn stallion named Arcane Grace when she saw Erin step back through the gateway, carrying a flimsy white sack of some sort in her teeth. She excused herself to go and talk to her human-turned-pony friend. Twilight, Erin said excitedly upon seeing her. I was hoping I'd run into you. I have a great surprise. I have my tablet here. With that, she stuck her head in the sack and came out a moment later with a shiny black rectangle of some sort, with what looked like glass on one side. Hold on, Erin said, sitting on her rump and holding the thing on the flat of one hoof while poking at it with the other. She pressed a button, and the glass lit up, followed shortly afterwards by the device making a soft ding sound. Ooh, Twilight said, transfixed. See. This is a tablet. I told you about these, right? It's a personal data device, right? Twilight asked, looking at the screen in fascination. It was so bright. You said that it held books, and movies and games and things like that, right? Right. It also connects to the internet, though I really don't think Equestria has access, Erin said, grinning impishly. Twilight smiled back. It was obvious that her friend was extremely excited to show her this. Admittedly, she was nearly as excited to see it. Here was a piece of genuine human technology. She still wasn't sure what it meant that there were all these things inside of it, but maybe it would make more sense once she saw it in action. Here, let me unlock it, Erin said, running her hoof across the screen. Nothing happened. Frowning, Erin ran her hoof across the screen, followed by still more absolutely nothing. I forgot that hooves don't work with this one, she said, looking like she was going to cry. Why wouldn't hooves work? Twilight asked, confused. It's a touch screen, it needs fingers to work. I don't get it, Twilight said, shaking her head. Erin sighed and stood up. Well, that was a complete bust, she said morosely. Why not have one of the humans do it for you? Twilight asked. Erin looked up, surprised. Of course, she said, smacking herself in the forehead with a hoof. Wait here. Twilight watched as Erin took the tablet in her mouth and ran to the nearest human. They had a brief discussion, and the human took the device gingerly, running his fingers over it as Erin instructed him to, tapping and tracing. It took a few minutes, but Erin soon came trotting back, grinning around the tablet in her mouth. I had him activate voice mode, she said, proudly, holding the tablet up once again. Okay, watch this. Tablet, open folder, pictures, open folder, graduation, display picture, grad photo. Twilight watched in awe as the device responded to her friend's commands. At the end, the device displayed a picture of a human wearing a black robe and an odd, flat hat with a tassel on it. The human was smiling joyfully out of the front of the tablet, holding a scroll tied with a ribbon. That's me, Erin said, beaming. What? Twilight stared at the picture. Then she stared at the pony holding the tablet. Then back again at the picture. It was almost inconceivable that these two were the same creature. The human in the picture looked different. She had lighter green eyes, for one, and a light brown mane, rather than the auburn that Erin had as a pony. The smile was nearly the same, though. It was a smile that took up the whole face, with a spark of joy in her eyes that was almost infectious. That's when I graduated from high school, Erin said, still smiling giddily. So, that's a few years old, but I didn't really look much different. My hair was a little shorter before I got changed, but otherwise I looked pretty much the same. Ignore the silly hat and robes, we humans only wear those for graduations. That's... Wow. Twilight sat down, staring at the picture. Are you okay, Twilight? Erin asked, the smile fading somewhat in concern. Yes. It's just, I knew you were a human before being a pony, but that was... Well, it's like I knew that mentally but not emotionally, you know. And now it's real, and it feels... weird. Oh, Erin said, angling the tablet away from her to look at it herself. Does it bother you? Her voice sounded slightly forlorn, and Twilight smiled gently. It will take some getting used to, but don't worry. It was just a surprise, that's all. I'd recommend warning the others about it before you show them that picture, just so they have time to prepare for it. Okay, Erin said, happiness making a comeback on her features. Well, let's close that, and I'll show you some other neat things, okay? All right. Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. Come on, guys, loosen up, Erin said, bumping a startled woman in the leg with her head. Pinky put a lot of effort into this party. For the most part, the humans were the aides of the ambassadorial staff, along with a large number of the off-duty harmonics scientists. The camera crew was helping to keep things awkward by silently filming everyone while insisting that people pretend we're not here. The ponies included almost all of her friends from Ponyville, except for Fluttershy, who had a sudden onset of crippling social phobia syndrome. Also included were several off-duty guards, a smattering of curious castle staff, and some of the lower-ranking pony ambassadorial aides. In addition, there were a couple of young griffins, though neither one was Greta. They were a couple, though, judging by how they were basically hanging on each other all night. Not many very high up on either side had deigned to show up at this party, preferring the more formal and official reception the following night. It wasn't as big of a success as the party that had been thrown for Erin back in Ponyville. Many of the Canterlot ponies seemed too concerned with their appearances, and most of the humans seemed dazed, standing around in small groups of other humans while holding glasses of punch. Pinky was doing her best to keep things going, but none of the humans or ponies really seemed interested in her party games. It was heartbreaking, seeing the look of desperation on her pink features as she tried to jolly people and ponies to interact. Erin gave up trying to push people one at a time to join in, and sidled up to Twilight, who was watching the proceedings with a small frown on her face. This isn't going as well as I'd hoped, the unicorn said. The Canterlot ponies are too snooty, and the humans just seem to be stunned by everything. Poor Pinky. She looks so frantic for every pony to have fun, Erin said, watching as the party mayor tried to get the different groups to mix. I ain't seen her this upset since she thought we didn't like her parties anymore, Applejack said. You don't think she's going to go all loopy again, do you? Rainbow Dash asked, looking nervous. She may, the poor dear, Rarity said, looking sad. Erin watched as yet another group of humans grinned awkwardly at Pinky before waving off her efforts to get them to loosen up. Pinky sat down with a sigh, and Erin could swear that she could see tears in her blue eyes. Then the worst thing ever happened. Pinky's lower lip began to tremble. Erin set her drink down firmly and began walking towards a small, raised stage in the middle of the party room. What are you going to do? Twilight called after her. Something that I'm sure I'll regret, Erin said over her shoulder. Please don't think less of me for this. Quickly, she found Maggie chatting with some of her colleagues and talked her into coming with her. She needed fingers for her plan, thanks to her hooves not working on standard touch screens. As she walked, she quickly explained her idea to the scientist, who chuckled with anticipation. This should be interesting, Erin, Maggie said, but I don't know that your reputation will survive it. It was the trembling lip that did it, she thought as she climbed up on the stage. Trembling lower lips were too much for anyone, human or pony, to bear. She stepped bravely in front of the microphone at the center of the stage and tapped it a couple of times with her hoof, hearing the echo of the tap from speakers all over the room. Hello every pony, every human, and every griffin, she said cheerfully into the microphone. Some of you know me, some of you don't. My name is Erin, and I'm a human who was turned into a pony. She had everyone's attention now. Even the pair of griffins had stopped making out long enough to pay attention to her. You know, Pinky had asked me, when she was setting all of this up, what kinds of things humans do for fun at parties. And, well, I remembered that we had this old thing in the break room in the harmonics facility. She pointed to the screen that was set up on a rolling cart. Maggie was busily scrolling through the menus until she found what she was looking for, and then turned to give Erin a thumbs up. Luckily, it didn't take much effort at all to get it plugged into the sound system. So, to get this party really started, how about we have a nice round of karaoke? She nodded to Maggie, and the music started, an old disco song from way before Erin's mother had even been born. She wasn't sure why it was, but every karaoke machine she'd ever seen had this song on it. And, at some point, someone always got drunk enough to try and sing it. Erin wasn't drunk. And, though she liked singing, she rarely sang in public, because she'd been reliably informed that she had the musical aptitude of a slightly deafened goat. Ordinarily, when forced for whatever reason to sing within earshot of anyone else, Erin made sure she kept herself quiet, and tried her best to stay on tune. Tonight was different. Tonight, she was going to sing loudly. She would sing proudly, and without reservation. Tonight, she was going to sing ABBA's classic hit, Waterloo. Taking a deep breath, she launched into her song, belting it out as if she were actually proud of her performance. It was passionate. It was loud. It was only passingly familiar with the correct tune. Erin had kept her eyes closed for most of the song, but curiosity eventually overwhelmed her enough to crack a lid open. Dozens of eyes, human and pony alike, were upon her, typically staring from above, mouths gaping open in shock. Rainbow Dash and Applejack were trying hard not to laugh at her performance, but Pinkie Pie was under no such reservations, rolling on the floor in uninhibited glee. Normally, she would have wanted to sink in the floor in shame, but tonight was different. Tonight, these people had almost made Pinkie Pie cry, and for that, they were going to be punished. With music. She continued singing ABBA at the top of her voice, unrelentingly. The song started to wrap up, and Erin sang the final verses with gusto. The music stopped. Dead silence reigned for a few seconds, aside from Pinkie laughing her tail off, and then Erin said, "Yeah. Woo, that was so much fun. Okay, who wants to go next?" "What? Nobody. Really? Oh, look, they have more ABBA, maybe I should go again." "No." The cry was near universal. Erin hid her grin as best she could. "Well, if you don't want me to sing, then maybe somebody else should get their butts up here and take over. How about you guys?" she said, pointing to a random couple of humans. They shook their heads and tried to wave her off. "Okay, no problem," Erin said, glancing over at the screen. The menu was still on the disco option. "Oh, look, they have Staying Alive. I love singing that song. Maggie, cue it up, okay." There was mass panic as the people she'd pointed to, a man and a woman, were railroaded by their friends up onto the stage. Erin hopped off, smiling in satisfaction. They didn't play the Bee Gees. Instead, they played Summer Nights from the similarly ancient Grease soundtrack. After that, the ice was broken, and more people took their turns attempting to sing. After Erin's self-inflicted humiliation, no one seemed to mind a vastly lesser amount of embarrassment. Even some ponies got into it, though they didn't know any of the songs. Fortunately, it seemed that most ponies were gifted with a natural sense of pitch and decent singing voices, so they typically fared at least as well as the humans. I'm really glad that worked, Erin confided to Twilight Sparkle as an extremely confused Rainbow Dash and Applejack attempted a floundering and completely out of sync rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody. I'd hate to think I'd humiliated myself for nothing. Twilight giggled. That really was the worst singing I've ever heard, she said. It was really nice of you, singing so poorly on purpose just to get the party going. Actually, that's how I really sing, Erin said, blushing and chuckling at the same time. Twilight stared in amazement. I thought it was all an act, she said, wide-eyed. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Don't worry about it, Twilight, Erin said, laughing. I know how bad my singing is, really. It's okay. It was more important that this party go off well. I didn't want to see Pinkie upset after all the work she put into this. You mean that awful singing was for me, Pinkie said, popping up unexpectedly behind her. Ah, yes. I guess so. Pinkie's eyes brimmed with tears as she smiled with joy. Why, that's the sweetest, bravest, most superficially horrifying thing that any pony's ever done to try and make a party of mine a success, she said, hugging her tightly. Thank you so much and please never do it again. Erin laughed, hugging the pink pony back. You got it, Pinkie, she said. The party continued late into the night. The karaoke was finally put away, once enough people and ponies had embarrassed themselves for one night. Random music was played over the sound system, alternating between recorded pony music and human music. There was some dancing, there were conversations, and groups of ponies and humans mingled and talked. Party games were played, including the pin the tail on the human game that Pinkie had prepared. Basically, you could only win if you missed the human completely, since humans didn't have tails. Erin found that hilarious for some reason. As the party wrapped up, Erin let herself outside to stare at the window hanging in the air in the middle of the Canterlot Gardens. Electric light spilled eerily across the manicured lawn as human porters brought back the empty boxes and luggage, the contents of which had been unpacked into the rooms of the human ambassadors. A tent was being set up right outside the gate, with cables running back into the harmonics lab. Apparently, equipment was being set up inside that would act as a communications hub for all of the human equipment in the area. They were also setting up various monitors that would take over Erin's role as the surveyor of Equestria. She wondered briefly if they had a wireless connection to the internet. She'd like to check her email, if possible. Remind me never to let you sing again, Maggie said, coming up beside her. Erin smiled wearily. She'd heard variations on that theme all night, and it was starting to wear thin. It had been worth it, but still. It's nice that the party worked out, though, Maggie continued. That Pinkie Pie sure does throw a great bash, when the people that show up pull the sticks out of their butts. She's a great person, Erin said, smiling more genuinely. Pretty much every pony I've met here has been nice. Every pony, Maggie repeated, chuckling. You've gone native, I see. Erin laughed and nudged the scientist with her shoulder. You try eating pony food for a month straight and see if you don't go native, she said. Oh, speaking of which, you were right. The food here is just amazing. I don't know if it's magic, or whatever, but dang, those were the best cupcakes I've ever eaten. They talked for a short while longer, just casually. Erin had always liked Maggie, even before she'd come over to Equestria, and it was nice to be able to talk without having to worry about a window closing mid-conversation. I see what you mean about magic, Maggie said after a while, looking up into the glorious night sky, so like and at the same time unlike the Earth's. There's so much here that's outside of our experience and understanding. It really baffles the mind, doesn't it? You get used to it, Erin said, suddenly feeling absurdly happy. They stood in silence for a few minutes longer, and then Maggie said, well, I guess I should be getting back to go to bed. I've got back-to-back meetings all day tomorrow with various extremely important people who have nothing better to do than stick their noses into my business. Night, Erin. Good night, Maggie. Thanks for coming, I know it meant a lot to Pinkie Pie. It was my pleasure, Erin. If tonight was any indication, I think I'll really like living in this world. Erin watched her go as she crossed back through the gateway, waving at the unicorn standing guard as she did so. Erin wasn't sure why there were guards posted, they didn't seem to stop anyone from crossing. Finally, her jaws cracking with a massive yawn, she decided to call it a night, herself, and left the party in search of her own bed. Author's notes. Chapter 22, Settling In. Twilight sometimes thought that things were changing just a little too quickly. She could feel history being written around her, and, as exciting as that was, it could also be somewhat frightening. There had been considerable hustle and bustle around the castle since the gate had opened. The tent that had been erected next to the gateway was now gone, and in its place was an awkwardly located wooden building in the middle of the gardens. The building completely hid the gateway from view, and there was a small staff of ponies on the equestrian side that would check the humans in and out. That included a few guards by the gateway, standing stoically on either side of the gate, as well as at the outside of the building itself. Twilight had been concerned about that, thinking that maybe the humans would think that they weren't trusted. But, so far, none of them had raised a fuss about it. Having guards must just seem normal to them. Still, there was a veritable flood of traffic through the gateway, though all of it was humans coming and going. Nopony wanted to visit Earth just to lose their magic. Twilight's battery idea had made considerable progress, though, and the Arcanum was now putting the final touches on several devices that demonstrably stored magic and could be used to draw it out again. Testing that device out was on her to-do list in a few days, and Erin had promised to show her around the Earth a little bit, for which she was grateful. Twilight was no longer included in any discussions with or about the humans, which on the one hoof was annoying, but on the other, it probably spared her a considerable amount of tedium in listening to overblown speeches and dull negotiations. Erin had also been asked by her own people to avoid talking to any ponies. She had stomped into the shared dining room in a foul mood after that, complaining that she'd been told that her services would no longer be needed, and that it would be appreciated if she kept her muzzle shut. Twilight wasn't sure if that's what the humans had actually said, or if it was Erin's embellishment, but she could sympathize with her frustrations. I may not be allowed to talk to the ministers or councillors anymore, but they can't order me to not talk to you guys, Erin had said at the time. And, even if they did, I would ignore it. You're my friends. Before the reception for the human delegation, Celestia had invited the press and released an official statement regarding the humans and the desire to come to this world. Excitement buzzed around Canterlot, and presumably also around the various cities and towns when the news reached them. The papers had flown off the shelves as excited ponies from all over Canterlot bought them. Pegasi photographers had even managed to infiltrate the grounds, and several shots of the humans had made their way into the papers the following morning. The formal reception had been just as boring as Pinky had said it would be. In addition to the ambassadorial staff, many humans had come through the gate, mostly including politicians and VIPs from various Earth nations, along with their entourages. They wore tuxedos and gowns, and were introduced to the nobility and the higher-ranking government officials of Equestria, as well as the foreign ambassadors of the Zebra, Minotaur and Griffin nations. Still, as boring as it was, the councillors and ministers of the Equestrian government who'd loudly protested humanity's access to Equestria were finally able to meet the feared creatures for themselves. Heartsbloom in particular had seemed almost disappointed when the human representatives had entirely failed to eat any pony. After the reception, most of her friends had returned to Ponyville. Rarity and Applejack had businesses to run, and Rainbow Dash had to get back to the weather team so they could start ramping up for winter. Fluttershy, never one to be comfortable in an urban setting, had practically jumped at the chance to return home with them, in order to get back to her animal friends. Pinkie Pie had decided to stick around, though. She was completely entranced by Erin's tablet, pestering the human to let her borrow it every chance she could. She'd found something called cartoons, and now spent most of her time watching them with fascination and howling with laughter. The humans had brought many gifts to be given to the ambassadorial staff, members of the government and nobility, and, of course, to the princesses themselves. The most impressive thing that they had given to the princesses, at least in Twilight's opinion, were a pair of elegant, custom-made tablet computers. Twilight herself might have never known about them if Luna and Celestia hadn't each called on Erin at different times to help them figure out how to use their new gifts. Unlike the tablets that Twilight had already seen, which were made of plastic in various colors with a clear screen on the front, these tablets were made with a shell of ornately carved wood. Golden mahogany for Celestia's, and ebony for Luna's. On the back of them was a depiction of each Princess Cutie mark, a sun of gold for Celestia, and a crescent moon of silver for Luna. Each tablet also had a stylus that could be used with it, nicely sidestepping the issue that Erin had with her own touch screen. Twilight had tagged along as Erin showed each princess the basics of how to use their new devices. To Twilight's chagrin, Luna had picked up on the use of hers far more quickly than Celestia had. She'd secretly hoped her mentor would be the better at adapting to the new technologies. Still, it had been interesting to see the princess confused and at a loss, baffled by the complexities of her new toy. The devices were incredible. Erin had noticed that they weren't connected to the wireless internet, which Twilight was dying to see. That the humans had set up throughout the castle, but they did come with thousands of books of human history, mathematics, science, geology and the like already on them, as well as works of fiction and philosophy. Music as well, though Erin had laughed a little at the selection. It's all opera and classical, she'd said, rolling her eyes. I guess they're trying to impress you with the fancy stuff. To Twilight's fascination, the books included several complete sets of encyclopedias. She had asked to borrow Celestia's briefly, eagerly looking up the entries on pony and horse, amazed at how quickly the device would find what you wanted. Erin had been right. The ponies and horses of Earth looked and acted nothing like the ponies of Equestria. Their cows looked somewhat similar, but their eyes were dull compared to the cows she talked to in Ponyville. She felt a sense of relief at that. She hadn't quite managed to banish a small fear that the humans were enslaving and eating sapient creatures. Celestia eventually had tapped her on the shoulder to get her tablet back, which Twilight had reluctantly returned with a sheepish grin. Oh, how she wanted one of her own. She'd even take a basic model like Erin's. But the humans had been fairly stingy with gifts of technology or information to those not in the government. She'd probably have to wait until things settled down a bit more. On the plus side, Erin had promised to buy one for her, once she had the chance and had been deponified. For now, she had to be content with the limited content that Erin's own internet-less tablet already had on it, which included many books, mostly fiction, and mostly having to do with very unrealistic depictions of magic, some movies, pictures including many more of Erin and her human friends and family, and several of what she called TV shows. Also, Erin had plenty of human music that hadn't been on Celestia's and Luna's tablet. For the most part, the songs were much shorter and much more energetic, though Twilight couldn't say that she enjoyed all of them. Some of it just sounded like random noises and crashes, making her lay her ears back in annoyance. In the future, she'd probably just stick to listening to the classical. It was much more familiar, even though it had a slightly odd sound to it compared to what she was used to. Right now, though, Twilight was preoccupied with regretting the promise she'd made 4 days ago to eventually accompany Erin on her morning runs. At the moment, her legs felt like they were going to drop off. Or, possibly, burst into flame, she wasn't sure. Her chest heaved, and sweat ran thickly down her flanks, chest and face. She almost felt like she was drowning in it. Her hooves ached, her muscles burned, and she had a wicked stitch in her side that made breathing painful. And, to top it all off, the chill air was making her shiver. I don't get it, she panted to an apologetic-looking Erin. You do this every morning. Pretty much, Erin replied. Are you okay? I shouldn't have pushed so hard, I'm sorry. No. Fine. Twilight lied breathlessly. Well, how about we walk for a little bit, nice and slow, so you don't cramp up? Twilight groaned, but pushed herself away from the bench she'd been leaning on. She could already feel her muscles tightening up, but the last thing she wanted to do was move around. Fortunately, the former human kept the pace nice and slow. I hope this doesn't put you off of running, Erin said. Once you get used to it, it's really relaxing and fun. Fun. Well, I think so, at least. I'll take your word for it, Twilight said. For now, she concentrated on just putting her hooves down in the right order and trying to get her breathing under control. Eventually, the cramp in her side subsided, and she was able to breathe deeply again. After a few minutes, she felt better. Wobbly and unsteady, sure, but somewhat better. Are you doing all right? Erin asked, having been observing her closely. Yes, thanks, Twilight said with a wan smile. Let me know if you feel like running again, she said with a grin. You should really just go without me, I'm only slowing you down. She felt pretty self-conscious about that. After she'd heard that Celestia had visited Erin during one of her morning runs, she'd suggested that maybe she could tag along. Today was the first day that she'd woken up in time to join her human friend, and now she was just slowing Erin down. Are you kidding? Erin replied. The whole point of running with a friend is exercise and companionship. Well, you're only getting one of those now, Twilight pointed out. True, but I'd only get one of them if I ran off without you, right? So, I'm really no worse off. Erin grinned at her, confident in her logic, and Twilight laughed. Fine, fine. But maybe we can keep the pace down a little bit. You got it, Twilight. I should have let you set the pace in the first place. Go as fast or as slow as you want to, okay? Okay. Thanks, Erin. They continued walking for a while in silence. Usually, the only time Twilight herself was ever up at this time was if she'd stayed up too late. But now, starting the day with the sun brightening the sky and the birds starting to sing in the crisp fall air, Twilight thought she could see what Erin enjoyed in these early morning runs. As they continued walking, they started chatting idly. Mostly, they talked about how much their lives had changed recently. It was strange for both of them. This is the biggest thing to happen in human history, ever. Erin said, for the first time ever, we've got humans walking on a world other than the one we've been born on. I thought you said you'd landed on your moon, Twilight asked. That had been an impressive thing to learn. That human technology could do that. And, once they moved here, if they shared it, soon, they could have ponies in space. How incredible would that be? You're right, that was an incredible accomplishment. I guess people my age tend to forget about it, since it happened way before we were born. My great-grandma was alive when we landed there, and she said it was the most incredible thing she'd ever seen. Twilight led the way around the gardens, occasionally breaking into a trot for a short while before walking again. It was embarrassing how poorly she was performing. Just the previous year, she'd done fairly well in the running of the leaves, and now she could barely trot around the gardens. It's because you pushed yourself too hard, Erin said when Twilight had brought it up. You exhausted yourself instead of pacing yourself. It was true. She'd wanted to impress Erin and not slow her down, so she had tried to keep up with the human's usual pace. I still don't get what's supposed to be so great about making yourself run just for exercise. It seems pretty pointless, she groused. Well, it's partially for health, and so that you have more energy for the rest of the day, Erin said. But for me, it's mainly because I enjoy it. Yes, but you have an artificially enhanced super pony body, remember? I'm just a poor little ordinary unicorn, she replied with an over-the-top pout, complete with fluttering eyelashes. Erin laughed, then bumped her with a shoulder affectionately. A super pony body that can barely keep up with Rainbow Dash and Applejack, yeah, Erin replied, grinning. Twilight was going to point out how unfair it was to say that when comparing herself to the two best athletes she knew of when the human added, besides, I always enjoyed running, even as a human. I don't get it. Of course you don't. Right now, you're still at the point where your body doesn't like it. It's like studying. What? No it isn't. Hold on, Erin said, I'm crafting an analogy here. Fine, go ahead, Twilight said, adding with mock sternness. But it had better be a darn good one, if you're comparing it to studying. Erin laughed again, and then continued speaking. Take Rainbow Dash, she said. There's a Pegasus that hates to study, considers it to be, for eggheads. But if you asked her anything about the Wonderbolts, she'd be able to tell you in detail whatever you wanted to know. Birthdays, stats, favorite colors, all of their tricks, and so on. And that's not because she liked studying, it was because learning about the Wonderbolts was fun. Okay. I guess I see what you mean. Exercising isn't the fun part is what comes with it. You got it. Erin said, smiling. Twilight sighed, realizing that she'd most likely not be able to come up with a convincing reason that the human would accept to not go on any more of these runs. She'd either have to just say no, or she'd have to avoid her every morning from now on. Or, maybe she should just give it a chance. It would be kind of neat to finish higher up in the running of the leaves next year. Maybe she could even enter the Iron Pony competition herself. If nothing else, she'd have an advantage over Dash and AJ, who'd be laughing too hard to compete properly. Say, Twilight, Erin said suddenly, as long as we're out here, could we go see Discord's statue? Twilight suppressed a shudder at the thought. Why would you want to go see that? She asked, trying to sound casual. It's not particularly pleasant to look at. I've just been curious. I've never seen a god of chaos before. She wrestled with herself for a little bit, and then gave in. Fine, she said reluctantly, he's over this way. But remember, don't do anything chaotic. You got it, Twee, Erin said with a chuckle. I'll be as orderly can be. After his last escape, Discord's statue had been placed in a distant, secluded corner of the gardens, far away from any common paths. It was still a lovingly maintained area, but not many ever came here outside of the gardening staff. They stared at his statue for a minute or two, mutely. Twilight wondered what was going through Erin's mind as she stared at the contorted mad god of chaos, locked in place by the elements of harmony. He doesn't look as dangerous as I thought he would, Erin said after a moment. She actually sounded disappointed. Twilight turned to her in shock. Why? What were you expecting? I don't know. Something scarier, or more impressive, I guess. He just looks frightened. Honestly, I almost feel bad for him. Twilight looked at her friend in surprise, and then felt a spark of annoyance. You only feel bad for him because you don't know what it was like to live through the things he did to us, she snapped, sounding more upset than she'd intended. You're right, Erin said, looking both surprised and guilty. I'm sorry. It's okay, Twilight said, feeling slightly bad for yelling at her friend. It's just, can we go? This thing kind of creeps me out a little. Yeah. Okay, let's go. They turned and trotted away, leaving the statue of the personification of chaos behind them. Unseen by them, a small bird landed on the statue's head, hopping back and forth for a moment. Then it flew off, but only after defecating on its nose. If the entrapped spirit of discord had any access to working lungs, it would have sighed. I get absolutely no respect, he thought. Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. Erin sighed as she got off of the train. She'd been dreading this for days, now. But she'd come clean to all of her other friends. It was time to come clean to the ones she'd left behind in Ponyville, as well. The town hadn't changed at all, which wasn't surprising. She was startled to realize she'd only been gone about 2 weeks. Honestly, it seemed like much longer. One thing that had changed, though, was the excited conversations of the ponies walking around the streets and marketplaces. She caught the word, humans, more than once, and idly found herself trying to overhear more. Then, shaking her head, she berated herself for trying to eavesdrop on private conversations. No more of that, she told herself. She contemplated where to go first. She had to tell her co-workers at FetX, and she had to tell Meadowlark and Little Marigold. Of the two, she thought it would be easier to tell her co-workers first. But, honestly, she'd rather get the hardest one out of the way as soon as possible. With a deep sigh, she trotted off towards the Ponyville guest house. She arrived at the door, unsure what to do. She hadn't paid in advance, so technically she wasn't a resident anymore. She hesitated, then pushed the doorbell and waited. It only took a minute before Meadowlark opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw who was there. Sunflower. Oh, my goodness, I'm so glad you're all right. She hugged Erin around the neck and ushered her inside. We heard that the princesses themselves were working on healing you. What happened? Well, long story short, I guess, I had some weird, ancient evil creature from the Everfree forest come out and possess me, in order to try and free it from its cage. Meadowlark nodded, looking unperturbed. I figured it was something like that, she said. Then, seeing Erin's expression, she said, what's wrong? I guess I was expecting a more surprised reaction than that. Meadowlark laughed and bumped Erin with a shoulder. I've lived in Ponyville too long to be fazed by something like that. We seem to have ancient evils popping up on an alarmingly regular basis, these days. Yeah, I've heard about a few of them, Erin said, chuckling weakly. Well, at least the elements got it, right, Meadowlark said. Yes, and no, the elements pushed it out of me, but it got away. The princesses are looking for it now. Oh, no, Meadowlark said, eyes wide. I don't think you need to worry too much about it, Erin said. It could only do what it did to me because of, well, some special circumstances. What circumstances are those? I'll tell you in a minute, but first, well, I think I should pay you for the last couple of weeks. I'll be moving out and staying in the castle for a while. Oh, Meadowlark said, looking unhappily surprised. I was hoping you'd move back to Ponyville, now that you're healed up. Marigold was, too. How is she? Erin was unable to stop herself from asking. She's better. She had nightmares about what happened to you for a while, after the Iron Pony competition. But she's mostly over them, now. I'm glad. It must have been a pretty terrible thing for her to see. Could we sit down? I have something important to talk to you about, and it won't be easy to hear. Meadowlark looked concerned and wary at the same time. Of course, she said. Meadowlark led the way, and Erin parked herself on the opposite side of the table from her. She'd rehearsed this in her head for days, but now that she was here she couldn't think of even how to start. So, what do you think of those humans? Meadowlark asked after a while, breaking the silence. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. Oh, Meadowlark leaned forward, eyes bright with excitement. I suppose you know more about them, since you just came from Canterlot. Yes, see. Well, I know a lot about the humans. They're looking for a new place to live since their home is about to be destroyed, and this is the only place they've found so far. That's what the papers say. Is it true that they eat meat? Sometimes. Not all the time, but I wanted to say that, the humans have actually known about this world for a few months, now. Really? Yeah. And, they knew it was inhabited, but they didn't know if we could live here, or if the ponies would be friendly or not, so. They used a special technique to turn one of them into a pony, so she could explore Equestria and find those things out. Erin stopped talking and looked into Meadowlark's eyes. The mare looked confused for a moment, and then her eyes widened with shock. You. Sunflower, is it you? Yes. I'm sorry. Oh, sweet Celestia, Meadowlark shouted, standing up quickly and backing away from the table. I'm sorry, Erin repeated desperately. I didn't want to lie, but that's no excuse. I'm really a human. My real name is Erin. You've been so kind to me. I wanted to let you know that I'll always value the time we spent together, and that I'll always consider you to be a friend. You're a. I let you watch my daughter, she shouted. And you're not even a pony. Meadowlark looked way past upset, now. She looked furious. Her left hoof scraped at the floor as her head lowered. Erin, in shock, idly wondered if the mare were about to charge and attack her. She decided that she deserved it, if she did. I would never hurt Marigold, Meadowlark. You know that. She said it as calmly as she could, to no effect. The mare was trembling with barely suppressed rage. No, I don't, she said. You lied about so much, how do I know you didn't lie about that too? Because I love her, and because I care about both of you, Erin stated simply. Meadowlark blinked in surprise. Love. How can I trust that? How do I know you're not just saying that? Why would I do that? Erin asked. If I was still trying to spy on you, I wouldn't have said anything. If I didn't care, I never would have come back, since the princesses know what I am now. I would have just stayed in Canterlot and never come clean. It would have been easier to avoid talking to you, if I didn't care. Some of the tension vanished from the mare. All right. Let's say that I accept that. That doesn't change the fact that, for weeks, I was letting an alien creature falset my daughter. An alien creature that would do anything in her power keep her safe, Erin said, honestly. I'd jump into a fire for that filly. Why? Meadowlark asked, clearly skeptical. Because, believe it or not, ponies and humans aren't so different. We have children, too. And we love them as much as ponies love their foals. And because, after meeting Marigold, for the first time in my life I've seriously considered having children of my own. Also, Erin continued, smiling weakly at the still upset mare, it doesn't hurt that she's so completely adorable. There was a long pause as Meadowlark visibly worked things over in her head. Erin wanted to say more, to defend herself, to explain herself further. But she knew that the best thing she could do now was to give the mayor time to figure things out on her own. Okay, Meadowlark said finally. Let's say I accept that, and I'm not saying I do. I still don't know if I can ever forgive you for deceiving me that way. And I don't think I'll ever trust you again. Certainly not with Marigold. I understand, Erin said quietly, looking at the suddenly blurry table in front of her. Will you be in town for long? Erin glanced up. Meadowlark's voice had changed from angry to businesslike. The change was unsettling. I was going to pack up my things, and then talk to my coworkers at FedEx and tell them what I told you before going back to Canterlot. I suppose I could wait around longer. Okay. Marigold is off playing with some friends. I'm going to go find her. You pack up your things and talk to your coworkers and then come back. It will do her some good to see that you're all right. Maybe clear up the last of those nightmares. Okay, Erin said, cautiously. I don't want you spending any time with her where I can't see you, do you understand? And you're not to mention any of this human stuff to her. I'll figure out how to tell her myself, later. Okay. Meadowlark stood there for a long moment, just staring at her. Then she nodded and trotted briskly out the door without saying another word. Erin sighed and lifted herself up off the floor. She made her way into the room and packed her saddlebags, both her nice new ones and her heavy old canvas ones. She slung both sets of bags over her back and tightened the straps, then took her coin purse out and dropped 10 bits into the manager's box along with a note explaining that it was for the rent she owed. She trotted to the FedEx office and discovered that she was in luck, as both Mr. Parcel and Lucky were in the office when she arrived. They greeted her happily, immediately dropping what they were working on to come and greet her. After the emotionally draining episode with Meadowlark, she was concerned about how these two would react. It turned out, though, that they were more upset by her resignation than by her hidden humanity. Seriously, Lucky said, staring at her with wide eyes. Wow, I was going to ask you out, too. You were? Erin asked, surprised. He hadn't seemed to be showing any interest. Yeah, but... Well, I don't suppose. You don't like stallions at all, do you? Or is it only human stallions? He sounded so hopeful. Erin smiled at him and shook her head. I'm sorry, Lucky. I'm going to get turned back into a human eventually. It wouldn't work out. Now, don't get all upset, young fella, Speedy Parcel said. There's nothing but single mares out there as far as the eye can see. You'll find your special sumpony soon. I suppose, he said, pouting at the floor. The door dinged as Carrot Top came in, carrying some wrapped packages. She took in the scene before her. This isn't a bad time, is it? Speedy Parcel laughed, assuring her that it was fine. Carrot Top smiled at them and walked up to place her packages on the counter. Well, business waits on Noppany, Mr. Parcel said. I'd better get back to it. You know, you're always welcome to come back whenever you like, Sunflower, even if you were secretly a human in disguise. Erin flinched at the casual way he just threw that out there. Carrot Top blinked at him as if trying to figure out if he was joking or not. Thanks, Mr. Parcel. I really did enjoy working here. Carrot Top was staring at her, wide-eyed and slack-jawed as Erin fled the store. She practically ran back to the guest house, almost feeling the rumors starting up behind her. Arriving back at the door, she rang the bell once again, and then let herself in. Immediately, she saw Marigold, the filly staring at her with almost disbelieving eyes. Sunflower, she said, eyeing her doubtfully. Hi Marigold, Erin said, forcing a smile. How are you, sweetie? I'm fine. You were all smoky and weird, though. Yes, I was. Something bad happened to me, but the princesses fixed me right up. I'm all better, now. You sure? You had a scary voice and stuff, too. I didn't like it. Yes, I'm sure. I'm sorry. I didn't like it, either. The filly stood there for a moment, then broke into a big grin, rushing forward to hug her around the leg. I missed you, she said, happily. I missed you too, Marigold. Erin hugged her back, smiling, until she heard Meadowlark clearing her throat. She looked up to see the mare frowning at her, and quickly began disengaging herself from the filly's embrace. I'm sorry, sweetie, but I have to get going. I have to go back to Canterlot. The princesses need my help with something. She nodded, looking sad. Mommy told me it's about the Homans. Humans, Erin corrected. And, yes it is. Will you come back to visit? Oh, she glanced up to see Meadowlark. She was still frowning, but after a few seconds she gave a shrug and looked away. Erin took that as a sign of encouragement, though not a very big one. If I can, I will, she said. Once things aren't so busy, maybe. But it won't be for a while, okay? Okay, Marigold said, sniffling. I have to get going, Marigold. One last hug, okay. And then I really have to go, okay. They hugged again, briefly, and then Marigold went back to her mother's side. Erin sighed, sad to think this might be the last time she ever saw the filly or her mother, who'd become a close friend during her time here in Ponyville. She met Meadowlark's eye one last time, seeing her struggling with something. Finally, Meadowlark sighed and said, if you could, Sunflower, I think we'd both like it if you came back to visit us sometime. I'd like that, Erin said. Thank you. She made her way out of the guest house for what would probably be the last time and took a moment to compose herself. Then, glancing at the clock in the center of town, she saw that she still had about 60 minutes before the next train to Canterlot departed. She had a quick lunch at the cafe, then wandered around town for a short while, looking at everything as if she was seeing it for the last time. She stopped into Sugarcube Corner and bought herself a fresh chocolate cupcake, making a point of telling the cakes that Pinky was doing just fine in Canterlot, which the married couple was very glad to hear. She exited the bakery and began making her way towards the station. On the way, she became aware of a noise behind her, as of a large crowd muttering and whispering to each other. Turning her head, she looked behind her to see that it was, in fact, a large crowd muttering and whispering to each other, and they were also staring at her with various expressions of amazement, fear or fascination. Erin turned back ahead, feeling uncomfortable. Surely, the rumors couldn't have spread that quickly, could they? Carrot Top would have had to work awfully fast. Now that she thought about it, she saw that the ponies she passed stopped what they were doing to stare at her. Definitely very creepy. Now slightly worried, she broke into a trot, reaching the train station a minute later. The crowd stayed well back, eyeing her warily. Erin returned the favor, standing impatiently at the platform and wishing the train would hurry up and get here already. One mare forced her way through the crowd and went over to buy a ticket at the counter. A short while later, the unicorn sidled up beside her. Erin glanced over to see her grinning and wide-eyed and well within her personal space. So, Lyra said, you're heading to Canterlot. Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. The finished design was in the form of a talk made of rune-carved wood, the runes inlaid with silver wire and accented with gemstones at various key points. Twilight levitated it over her head and let it settle around her neck, then glanced at herself in a mirror. Not bad, she thought. It was kind of like a classier, more feminine version of Big Mac's ever-present yoke. Rarity would approve. All set? Erin asked her, looking excited. You bet, Pinkie Pie said, wearing an identical talk of her own. Let's get moving, already. I'm ready as well, Twilight said. Me too, I guess, said Dewdrop, a Pegasus from the ambassadorial staff who'd volunteered for the test but now seemed to be having second thoughts. Well, let's get going, then, Erin said, walking towards the shimmering gateway. The unicorn guards on either side nodded as they went through. On the human side, the human soldiers standing similarly on the other side of the gateway gave them covert glances. Go on through, said a human stationed at the newly installed desk by the gate. We were told you'd be coming. You're clear to venture through the entire facility and the grounds outside, but please don't leave the compound. You got it, Erin said, leading the way. Twilight followed her friend as she led them through the hallways. Pinkie bounced along happily, humming to herself, and Dewdrop stared at everything, eyes wide, as if she was afraid something would leap out and attack her. Let me know if you start feeling weak or in any way strange, all right? Twilight said, but try not to do anything too strenuous yet, we want to get out of range of the gateway before we really test these out. Okie dokie Loki, Pinkie replied. Hey, do you think we could try some human treats? Is there a cafeteria nearby? I think I smell pie. Oh, could we get some pie, Twilight? Please. Pinkie, can I make a suggestion? Erin said. You got it. Make sure you check before you eat any human food that it's vegetarian or vegan, okay? I don't think you want to eat any animal parts by mistake. Oh, silly. You don't put animal parts in pies. They walked along in uncomfortable silence for a few seconds. Pinkie stopped bouncing and stared at Erin with her mouth hanging open. You don't put animal parts in pies, do you? She asked, looking horrified. It depends on the pie, really. And who made it? Usually they use vegetable shortening, but sometimes, well, some people use lard for the crust. Oh. Icky, Pinkie said, making a face. Don't worry too much about it. Pretty much everywhere you go, there will be vegetarian options. It's kind of a big thing, these days. Erin went on to explain the difference between vegetarian and vegan to the fascinated Pinkie Pie and the nauseous-looking Dewdrop. Twilight found it to be fairly interesting, herself, even though she'd heard Erin talk about it before. That there were humans who purposely avoided eating meat or animal products was definitely unexpected. Not even many ponies avoided eating eggs and butter on purpose. During the lecture on human foods, Maggie came out of a side hallway and joined them for a bit. Erin and her human friend exchanged pleasantries, followed by introductions between Maggie and Dewdrop, the latter of whom stuttered and stammered, but finally managed to extend a hoof for the human to shake. Afterwards, the Pegasus mare stared at her hoof as if wondering why it was still there. We were just heading outside to test these magic batteries, Erin said, once the introductions were complete. Actually, the Arcanum insisted on calling them a taumatic transference apparatus, Twilight said, giggling. Apparently, calling them magic batteries wasn't mystical enough for them. Oh. That would explain why you have one of each kind of pony. Maggie said, you want to make sure it works for each of you. That's right, Twilight said, nodding. During our first visit, I could barely move anything, and both Rainbow Dash and Applejack ran out of stamina quickly. Rainbow said she also was barely able to fly at all, though I don't recall her trying. They began walking towards the nearest exit once again, Maggie joining them as she and Erin started talking about how things had been going on Earth. They made the announcement a few days ago, Maggie said. I should show you the press releases. A new land to call home, and everything, along with some nice shots of various landscapes. How did people react? Erin asked. They went nuts, of course, Maggie said, chuckling. There are places where the parties are still going on in the streets. Twilight frowned at Pinkie Pie, who had started grinning a very disturbing grin at that statement. Don't you dare wander off, she whispered fiercely to her pink friend, who smiled back at her and winked. But that was nothing compared to how people reacted to the news that there are multiple non-human sapient life forms there, Maggie continued. I think most people are excited, but then a lot of people are scared, or in denial. Some people are having a really hard time accepting that there is other intelligent life out there. There have been protests and everything. Protests? Erin asked, sounding amazed and slightly disgusted. Protesting what? The existence of ponies on their own world. Yes, though most of the protests right now are from the Earth First people. They don't like any thought of abandoning the Earth. The ones who are protesting the news about sapient non-human life are just idiots that nobody really takes too seriously, especially since we've got video of ponies and griffins all talking. Which reminds me, you should really see that documentary that was released. The most watched film of all time within 5 hours of its release. Wow, Erin said. Any news on the tide itself? Thanks to Herman and some other scientists, we've managed to slow the expansion still further. It's not much bigger than when you left, though it's still growing. It's maybe another 50 miles in diameter, and the scientists have adjusted the doomsday clock back about a year. Well, part of what we're going to do is see if equestrian magic can further slow down or stop the growth, maybe even reverse it. That would be wonderful, but I'm not going to get my hopes up quite yet, Maggie said. Oh, and by the way, you might want to call your parents. They've been calling pretty much every day this last week, trying to get a hold of you. Oh, Erin said, looking surprised. Yeah, I can do that after the tests, I guess. They walked for a while longer, chatting amiably. They quickly reached the exit, passing a few humans who stopped to stare at them. Each time that happened, Dewdrop shrank back on herself, as if trying to make herself too small to be seen. Twilight sympathized. All the attention was making her coat itch, but she could understand the humans' fascination. After all, the humans visiting Canterlot were stared at quite regularly by palace staff. Maggie opened the door for them, and bright daylight spilled inside, making Twilight flinch slightly after the relatively dull corridors. Blinking, she stepped forward, feeling the grass under her hooves and smelling the relative sweetness of the air. Her vision cleared, and she saw that they were in a very mountainous area, the land covered thickly with trees of all sorts. It looked very similar to Equestria, though wilder. She'd been expecting something more like the Everfree Forest, but this actually looked very pleasant. Twilight turned to talk to Erin, but was surprised to see that there was a uniformed human guard standing on either side of the doorway, wearing uniforms consisting of a dark blue coat and pants, and a white hat on their heads. Each of them was holding what Twilight recognized from Erin's descriptions as a rifle. Erin trotted past the guards, completely unconcerned. However, the Earth Mare stopped suddenly in her tracks, staring at a large, grey stone wall in the distance. Whoa, that wall is new, Erin said. When was that put in? Well, remember the whole Earth Firsters thing I mentioned? Maggie asked. We can't take any chances. Security has been up to almost ridiculous levels since you left. They must have built it fast. I've only been gone, what, 5 weeks? 6. Almost 6, yes. They actually started it before you got shipped to Equestria, but since you weren't allowed outside, I guess you didn't see it. Is everything okay? Twilight asked. We're not going to get attacked or anything, are we? Dewdrop cringed at the suggestion and Twilight tried very hard not to roll her eyes. She was really regretting that Rainbow Dash hadn't been able to make the trip back. Dewdrop was barely any better than Fluttershy. No, ma'am, a male voice said, and another man in a uniform came walking out behind them. We control the land around here for miles and are constantly monitoring it. Nobody gets near here without our knowing it. The wall is just an additional precaution. Ladies, let me introduce Major Morris, Maggie said. Major, this is Twilight Sparkle, Pinkie Pie and Dewdrop, was it? Dewdrop squeaked an affirmative. And, of course, you know Erin Olsen, Maggie finished. Glad to make your acquaintance, the Major said. Don't mind me, I'm just here to observe. Please feel free to begin your tests whenever you feel ready. Right, Twilight said. She saw that there were several large stones arranged in the yard and she focused, lifting one up. The strain was no different from lifting the same amount of weight in Ponyville. So far, so good, she said. Let's get going, shall we? Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. Erin felt a little bit like a fifth hoof, to use pony terminology, as the ponies tested out their new magic batteries, or whatever it was that the Arcanum had decided that they should be called. The ponies started on all their various tests that Twilight had planned out for them, and all she could do was watch. Dewdrop was flying around, slowly and barely off the ground. That had been a precaution that Twilight had insisted on. She hadn't wanted the Pegasus to be too far off the ground or moving too quickly if the battery should cut out. Pinkie Pie was zipping all over the open yard, running and jumping, and occasionally stopping to roll in the grass. Erin wasn't sure if the Earth Pony was being supplemented by magic or by sugar. Twilight herself was running through a checklist of various activities. Basic levitation was done, then extreme levitation, where she lifted several rocks all at once. Then, much to everyone's surprise, she teleported from one end of the field to the other. Erin heard one of the guards behind her gasp in shock, but they were both wearing poker faces when she turned to see which one it was. That was a brave thing you did, Major Morris said suddenly. Erin blinked and looked up at him, momentarily unsure if he was talking to her or someone else. Me? She asked, and he nodded. What did I do that was brave? You mean going to Equestria? That too, he said with a chuckle. I was referring to leveling with your friends, and staying honest after you'd promised to tell the truth. That's a hard thing to do. Erin blushed at that. She didn't feel that just being honest deserved any kind of special praise. It didn't feel brave, she said. I had to do it, to keep my friends. And, well, I wanted to do it because I was sick of lying. That's not what I meant, he said. Plenty of people might have, well, glossed over certain things. You told them the absolute truth, not only about yourself, but humans in general. It made some folks in the ambassadorial staff pretty livid, but I think it was the right thing to do. The ponies have a right to know exactly what they're dealing with. Would you have done the same thing? Erin asked. No, he said. But then, I wouldn't have tried to make friends, either. Your approach brought us a lot more benefits than mine would have, regardless of what anyone says. Erin stared at him for a moment, and then smiled. Thanks, she said. That's nice to hear. They stood in silence for a while, watching the ponies testing their magical collars. Granted, the part with the Chimera was pretty awesome, too, he said suddenly. Though, my personal favorite in that encounter was Rainbow Dash. Erin laughed. Rainbow was pretty awesome, and she saved my life for sure. But I think it's pretty clear that Twilight saved the day, there. She's the one who got the fillies out of the way. Well, he replied with a mock frown, we'll just have to agree to disagree, won't we? Erin laughed again, and after a moment Major Morris joined in as well. You know, Erin said, if you wanted me to, I could probably get you her auto. Yes, please, he said eagerly, and then there was a flash of light, and a bushy moustache suddenly appeared on his face. Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. There was a familiar humming sound, and the air split open before her as a second gateway to the earth opened in the Canterlot Gardens. The first thing she noticed, before they even walked through, was the noise. It was completely beyond anything she'd experienced, a humming, hissing and crackling sound that seemed to emanate from everywhere all at once. The second thing she noticed was that the air smelled wrong, a little like the scent after a thunderstorm, only much more intense, and a smell that reminded her somewhat of burning coal, though not exactly. In addition to that was a melange of acrid chemical scents that assaulted her nostrils and stung her eyes. She was suddenly less reluctant regarding the mask and goggles that the humans had provided for her, slipping them on quickly. They were uncomfortable, but they filtered out the harsh fumes. She heard some of the others grousing about putting on the protective gear, but the complaints stopped as soon as they saw that she was wearing her own. Celestia stepped through the portal and saw the thing that was devouring the earth. The black tide stretched away like a dull black sea. The rubbery mass of it rippled randomly, disturbingly. Surrounding what the humans called the biomass, which was the main mass of the tide, was the nanoring, a circle of pure jet black, perhaps a tenth of a mile in width, bubbling and churning as it devoured the rock surrounding the tide itself, adding more and more material to the mass behind it. Standing 5 miles back from the black ring, she got her first glimpse of the humans' efforts to stop the tide from advancing. Various large towers belched liquid flames at the nanomachines that formed the outer ring of this threat. According to the humans, high temperatures were one of the only things found to actually destroy the devices. Certain acids also worked, but they weren't able to produce them in the large quantities needed. In addition, there were large, cylindrical devices pointing towards the tide itself. Those were devices they called lasers that the humans were using to try and burn away the tide, apparently using beams of focused light. Every 100 feet, another wheel tower was releasing a stream of flame or acid, the towers being supplied by large trucks at their base, which also, according to the briefing she'd been given, served to pull the towers back as the tide approached. Celestia turned her head first one way, then another. The line of towers matched the encroaching line of the tide for as far as her eyes could see, all the way to the horizon. Suddenly, she was much less certain about their ability to defeat this enemy with magic. But she still was determined to try. They walked forward, towards the trucks that had been provided to bring them closer to the tide. They were to get no closer than the towers, but Celestia had refused to allow the gate to Equestria to open any closer to the line. Seeing it now, even the 5-mile gap was far closer to Equestria than she wanted this thing to come. A ramp was lowered from the rear of the truck, and the ponies all entered, standing awkwardly as the vehicles trundled slowly down the dirt road. She could have flown faster, but she wanted to conserve as much energy as she could in her talk, the carved wooden device temporarily replacing the regalia she normally wore. Finally, the trucks stopped. The royal guard exited first, making sure the area was safe before giving the all-clear to Celestia. Ordinarily, she was more than capable of taking care of herself. But this thing on this alien world had her somewhat shaken. She was more than happy to have her soldiers here, looking out for her. She stepped down, hooves clattering on the raised platform that the humans had erected to keep them off of the toxic mud at the base of the fire and acid-spewing towers. She tried to remain calm as she regarded the bubbling and oozing mass of nanomachines perhaps half a mile before her. The tide itself stretched across the visible horizon, an endless ocean of dull black. She extended her awareness, cautiously, trying to sense any sign of intelligence or life. She sensed something. She wasn't certain what it was, or even if it was aware, but the tide was definitely, in some way, alive. She tried to communicate with it, tried to ask it to stop, to not devour this world. Minutes rolled by as she stretched her mind to the task, trying to break through, to understand what it was, what it wanted. Trying to be understood in return. Nothing. The tide didn't respond. She removed herself from her trance, looking at the concerned ponies around her. What she had done was dangerous, they knew, but it was something only she, herself, could do. I'm afraid that negotiating a peace is out of the question, she said, her words muffled somewhat by her mask. It's alive, in some fashion, but I don't know that it's aware. I see. What next, then, princess? Should we use the elements? Twilight looked at her trustingly from underneath the tiara of the element of magic. Celestia glanced behind her at all of Twilight's friends, each wearing the necklace of their element over their talks. Yes, Twilight. But, do be careful, I do not trust this thing. Yes, princess. Girls, are you ready? Let's hit it with a rainbow, Pinky said, scowling at the tide. Indeed. This hideous thing simply has to go, Rarity agreed from behind her mask. Celestia was slightly amused to note that she had somehow managed to find the time to decorate hers slightly, sewing in some gemstones and somehow dyeing the entire thing a brilliant white to match her coat. I'm ready, Rainbow Dash said, adjusting her Wonderbolt issue goggles. I don't like that thing, Fluttershy said, frowning. It's not right, it's not natural, you can count on me. That's it, Twee. We're ready, Applejack said. All right, then. Girls, formation. The humans, and even the royal guards, stared in wonder as the elements lit up, enveloping the 6 friends in a warm glow of bright light. As they lifted gently off the ground, Twilight's eyes snapped open, brilliant radiance spilling forth. The light twisted, condensed, and formed itself into a scintillating rainbow, shooting towards the tide almost faster than the eye could follow. Celestia felt a glow of pride in how well her student had mastered the element of magic, even surpassing Luna and herself. The rainbow hit the nano ring and washed over it, obscuring it from view. It expanded, shooting off both north and south, while also rolling with deceptive slowness over the biomass itself. The light from the friends increased in intensity, and the rainbow brightened as well. All mortals present covered their eyes to protect them. Finally, the light dimmed. The mares descended back to earth. Celestia looked towards the tide. But. We hit it with the rainbow, that's not fair. Pinky wailed. There was no effect. None at all. The elements had failed to even damage the tide. Should we try it again, princess? Celestia looked down at her student, who was panting from the effort she'd just put out. No, Twilight. If the elements were going to work, they would have worked the first time. I'm sorry, princess, her student said, eyes welling up with tears. I failed you. Of course you didn't, Celestia said, shocked. This filly. Sometimes she took things far too personally. Believe me, you wielded the elements as well as it is possible to wield them. Better even than I. There was nothing more any pony could have done. Twilight sniffled and smiled at her. No need to fear yet, Celestia assured her. I have still to take my turn. The Sun Princess turned to face the tide, her power slowly welling within her. This thing was damaged by heat, they had told her, and hers was the power of the sun itself. She filled herself near to bursting, drawing not only on the power of her talk, but on the equestrian sun itself, barely accessible through the distant gateway. It took time, many minutes sweeping by as she accumulated her strength. But, finally, she was ready. Look away from me, she instructed, her voice reverberating with the power she contained. I would not have you damage your eyes. Ponies and humans alike backed away from her as the heat radiated from her coat. Her eyes blazed with the fury of an inferno. As the power reached its peak, Celestia unleashed it, an incandescent beam that could boil rock. The beam etched its way across the nano ring, vaporizing whatever it touched almost instantly. Celestia swept her eyes across the ring, and the beam followed, destroying as it went. Soon, as far as she could see in both directions, the nano ring had been obliterated, condensed down to a motionless, black slag. She then turned her attention to the black tide itself, that hideously ripping monstrosity. The light lanced into it, sending up a tremendous plume of smoke as the oily mass shuddered and collapsed into a fine ash. The tide reacted, dragging itself backwards, thickening in the distance as it tried to pull itself away. For the first time since the impact, the tide receded. She was dimly aware of the humans cheering. She couldn't keep this up much longer, though. Her power was fading rapidly. She was too far from the gate, her grip was tenuous at best. Still, what power she had, she would use while she still could. She drew a line of fire across the tide, burning away a swath of it as if it had been cut with a knife. The mass bulged up on either side, trying to withdraw from this new threat. Idly curious as to what would happen, she drew a line of fire in a semicircle across the mass, cutting off a smaller piece from the rest. The two masses fell away from each other, and the smaller one withered slightly before they joined back together. She felt a sense of grim satisfaction. It would take time and effort, but she'd undone the growth of days in the matter of minutes. With both her and Luna working together, as well as ponies from the Arcanum, she was certain that the days of the tide were numbered. It would take months, perhaps even years, to destroy it all. But humanity could be saved, without resorting to fleeing their home world. That's incredible, Celestia, she heard an excited Twilight Sparkle say. She smiled, glad to hear her name from her prized pupil, for once without the honorifics. Her time was nearly up. The talk was spent, the power dwindling to nothing, and the energy she had pulled from Equestria was fading rapidly. The counterattack came swiftly and with almost no warning. The presence she had felt earlier surged towards her, a massive wall of psychic force without any obvious intelligence behind it. She barely had time to pull the remnants of her power back into herself before it closed in on her, pressuring her mind from all sides, crushing her beneath its weight. Her vision narrowed to tunnel vision, and her body spasmed as her mind was relentlessly assaulted. She heard Twilight calling her name frantically, and became aware of the fact that she, herself, was screaming in agony. No, I mustn't do that, a small corner of her mind fretted. Twilight will worry if I scream.